NEA Big Read Waukesha Reads presentation. At any time during the program tonight, you can type questions into the YouTube chat box, and we will compile your questions to be answered at the end of the presentation. Our featured speaker tonight is Sam Mihara. In 1942, the US government forced 9-year-old Sam and his family, along with everyone of Japanese ancestry living in the West, out of their homes and into prison camps. Sam and his family were sent to a prison camp called Heart Mountain in desolate northern Wyoming. The entire family lived in one small room without facilities for 3 years. After returning home, Sam graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, and UCLA Graduate School with engineering degrees, and he spent the rest of his career working at the Boeing Company as a rocket scientist. Since his retirement, Sam has been a sought-after guest speaker. He's spoken at several leading universities, including Harvard, Columbia, Yale, and Georgetown. And in February 2019, Sam spoke before Congress. He is the first Japanese American to have won the Paul A. Gagnon Prize as History Teacher of the Year. And we're so excited to have Sam with us tonight to explore the question, could mass imprisonment happen again? Please welcome Sam Mihara.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your kind introduction. Let me begin by mentioning that I owe my thanks to both Sarah and Corey, Sarah Poppy and Corey Hall, for making arrangements to allow me to be able to broadcast from my home here in Huntington Beach, California. What happened was a recent development on the airlines made it very difficult for me to be exposed to the conditions because the airlines are having some real difficulty recently on controlling the problem of the virus getting to people in my condition. So I'm not going to go into detail about my condition. I'm okay, but I shouldn't be doing flying if I don't have to. And so that's thanks to Sarah and Corey. The story I'm going to be giving you is very personal because I've learned over the years, talking to a lot of people, describing what it really felt like and what went through our minds as we went through the process of imprisonment. Making it personal, there's a feeling that people tend to remember, and so I'm going to be talking a lot about what I remember and show you pictures along the way. And the program, that portion will take roughly about 50 minutes, a little less than an hour. We'll take a short break. And then when we come back, I'll describe the results of my visiting several of today's prisons for undocumented immigrants. That'll take maybe about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A. So let me set up my file. Okay, can you all see that? Sarah, is it on the screen? Or Corey? Uh-oh, I'm not hearing anybody.
Yes, Sam, it is.
It's on the screen. Okay, that's all I need to know. All right. So anyway, this is a story of my recollection of the process we went through of being imprisoned during World War II. Oops. Whoops. No, what happened? Oh, okay. I've got to go to my, here we go. A few years ago, President George Bush made a speech at the dedication of the African American National Museum in Washington, D.C. And I remember I heard that speech, and the first sentence he gave read, "A great nation does not hide history."
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
It looks like your screen share dropped. Could you try to share it again?
Let me go back. Wait one. Well, here we go. Where's my screen share? All right, here we go. Share screen again. Okay. Share, how's that? Is that it? Is that okay?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, now let me go to slideshow. And let me go to from start. All right, now is that working? Okay, and let me advance the next slide. Okay, did that advance? Okay.
Yes, it did.
Okay, raise your thumb that I could see it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me tell you the story about my family. That's a picture of my family, and we're zooming in on that stubborn brat. That's me. I was about 7 years old in the photograph. My brother's next to me, my father behind me, my mother to the right standing, and my grandma and grandpa Mihara seated on in the front. My parents and my grandparents were the immigrants. They were the original people from Japan who came over this country to look for a better life. And we call them Issei. I comes from the number 1 in Japanese, which is the number Ichi. Ichi means number 1. That means first generation. My brother and I were born in San Francisco. As a result, we're called Nisei. Ni comes from the number 2 in Japanese. So we call ourselves Nisei. And our children would be called Sansei. San is number 3, and so forth and so forth. And when I speak at colleges, I now see 5th and 6th generation of Japanese since the original immigrants. So times have flown, really amazing. The problem began a long time ago. Back in the 1800s, many of you may remember that the Asians, the Chinese and Japanese were brought into this country to help build the railroads. And when the railroads were finished, a lot of them, in fact, about 80% decided to stay. And most of those stayed in the West Coast, in California, Oregon, and Washington. And as the concentration of the Asians built up on the West Coast, the hatred against Asians started building up. And we started seeing these kinds of political cartoons. Yellow terror threatens white women. There's an Asian with a bloodied knife and a smoking gun standing on top of this woman he just killed. So that's the source of the hatred that crept through the communities. The people, started associating Asians with danger, and something must be done about it. So that was the real cause of the problems that continued on past 1900. So which was even before my father was born. And so it shows you how long the problem existed. After Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, life became very difficult for people of Japanese ancestry. We started seeing these types of cartoons. Here is a Japanese soldier with a bloodied knife and a Nazi German soldier with his weapon. And they're both encroaching upon the continental United States. And the caption says, "Our homes are in danger now." That really means it's the people who are living here in the United States who are of Japanese or German ancestry who are the real problems during World War II. This cartoon is probably, in my opinion, it's the most ridiculous of all. Here is a stream of people starting from the state of Washington, and they're building up more and more people. These are all Japanese, people of Japanese ancestry, going through Oregon, Northern California, finally come to Southern California, where this huge army of these Japanese faces coming to a station, which is a distribution point for nitroglycerin, TNT. And here's a spotter on the roof, and the spotter's waiting for the signal from the enemy ships. that says, now's the time, hand it out, and give instructions to take these boxes of nitroglycerin and destroy the defense installations. So this is, you know, pointed at the Japanese people living here in California and Oregon and Washington. And if you can see the fine print, guess who the artist was on this print? You can see Dr. Seuss, the children's artist. And he made more of these very insensitive type of political cartoons. So that's another, you know, basis for the hatred that built up during that time. I remember this newspaper headline went up in San Francisco right outside my house, and it had the caption, "Ouster of all Japs in California is near." In other words, well, I should pause at this moment and mention the abbreviation for the proper word Japanese, spelled JAPS. Those of us who went through this, we hate it because we relate the abbreviation to what happened to us during the war. And so I asked teachers, be sure to teach your students, think about it in terms of the misuse of the N word today. That's how strong we feel about it. No, but from my viewpoint, I'm a historian. I want to show my audience evidence of what they used to think about us, and showing these newspapers and other things that you'll be seeing in a moment is clearly historical and very important to understand. But anyway, the headline being to alert the people, hey, it's getting close. We're going to get rid of all these Japanese people who are living in California, you know, so not to worry about it. You know, awful headline. This billboard went up a half a block from my house. I lived in San Francisco in the heart of we'll call it Japantown, and half a block up on the corner was this billboard. It said, "Bye-bye, Japs," before they announced that we were to be officially leaving. So it shows the kind of publicity and the media that created the problem at that time. I usually ask, raise your hands if you recognize his face, but I assume some of you will and some of you will not recognize this photograph by Dorothea Lange. The image is called Migrant Mother, and Dorothea is on the right. She's the photographer. She was hired by the government during the Great Depression in the early 1930s to go to the farm country and take pictures of farm workers who were suffering during the Great Depression. And she found this family, this mother and the children. And she took the picture, and it became an icon for her because it shows, without even a caption, it shows this family's in deep, deep trouble. And as a result, with that skill of taking images that shows human emotion, when World War II began, the government asked Dorothea to go to San Francisco and start taking pictures of Japanese people and make a documentary. And the instructions to her was, do not take embarrassing pictures. Don't take pictures that are mean. That makes the government look bad. Take nice pictures in the process of our removing these Japanese people from their homes. Well, it turns out, luckily, Dorothea doesn't take orders. She takes pictures she thinks that are important. And you're going to see some in this talk that turned out to be very, very important. The first thing she did, she came to Japantown. She went to a grammar school, which is about a couple of blocks from my house, and took this picture. Young boys in my class, these are my classmates. This is in the 4th grade. And you can tell by their complexion, by the way, these kids, we were well diversified in 1942, you know, way before it became popular to be diversified. That's simply because it was the nature of our neighborhood. And we got along fine. All these fellows are of different races and religious groups, and there was no problem. But in the second row, these are my good buddies. These are Japanese Americans. The guy in the middle, which is blown up right here, his father gave him the first name of Katsutoshi. His last name is Ito. Now, Ito is very common, But Katsutoshi was hard to pronounce by the rest of these kids because they don't speak Japanese. And so his father said, oh, that was a mistake. I'm going to rename you. And he renamed my buddy Willie. So he became known as Willie Ito. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Willie in a moment. You'll be surprised as to what he turned out to be. The most important photograph that Dorothea Lange took is this one right here. It's a group of second grade 7-year-old girls giving their Pledge of Allegiance. And the significance, photograph-wise, the significance is look at the facial expressions of all these girls. You can sense that when they give the pledge, I pledge allegiance to the flag. You can see that they're sincere. They really mean it. And that's what made this photograph famous. And it's been shown in museums and in books. And I'll talk a little bit more about one of the girls inside this photograph. But that's a very important shot that Dorothea took. And all of you know that important phrase in the pledge, with liberty and justice for all. When the military with weapons comes and removes you from your house and forces you to go to a prison, you've lost liberty. And when they do that without any justice, no justification, no evidence of a crime being committed, you were denied justice. So on these 2 points from the Constitution, this was a major, major civil rights denial to the people of Japanese ancestry. And that was the claim that we made after it was all over. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. President Roosevelt, he made some good decisions, but he made one mistake, a huge mistake. He relied on his advisors on what to do about the, quote, Japanese problem. And the advisors recommended to the president that he put out an executive order. And that executive order was signed on February 19th, 1942. And it's called Executive Order 9066. In that order, it simply says, I, the president, am giving the authority to remove anybody. I'm giving that authority to the local military. So he doesn't name Japanese, he doesn't name Germans or Italians. He simply says, I am giving the authority to the military. Well, who are the military who makes these decisions? If you look at this next map, this is the map of the military districts in the US in 1942. There were 5 districts. On the East Coast, there was this Lieutenant General Hugh Drum. General Drum's in charge of the eastern sector. And he had a problem because in the East, there were many German families and there were many Italian families and there were a few Japanese families. And now he had the authority from the president to remove anybody, including any of those people. Well, he decided not to. One reason is the industry said, don't do that because I'm going to lose my workers. And the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese are good workers. So he did not. Way out in the Pacific, there was a Lieutenant General de Los Emmons. General Emmons was in charge of Hawaii district. And he had an interesting problem. Hawaii was made up of 40% Japanese in 1942. So he had the authority to remove all the Japanese from Hawaii, but he did not for 2 reasons. Number one, like the General Drum's situation, the industry, the pineapple industry, the sugar industry complained, don't do that because I'm going to lose my workers. But most important, General Emmons said that is unconstitutional. An Army general quoting from the Constitution, he's not going to execute an authority given to him by the president. You know, really a brave, courageous fellow. So General Emmons didn't remove anybody. However, General DeWitt on the West Coast, Western Defense Command, he had no problem. He hated Japanese. He didn't hate Germans, he didn't hate Italians, but he hated Japanese. Well, what he decided then was, it's no problem. I'm going to remove all Japanese. Now, what's the evidence that he was such a racist against, only the Japanese? Well, it turns out he put out an order which defines who is a Japanese, because there were many younger people who had mixed parents. In other words, part Japanese and part non-Japanese. And he defined who is a Japanese. He said, if anyone had at least 1/16 blood, 1/16 blood who was Japanese. In other words, if you had a great-great-grandparent who was Japanese, and you are defined as a Japanese, that's his definition. Well, where does he find these people with these fractions of a Japanese? He found them in orphanages. Here's a photograph taken of orphan kids. They were removed from orphanages. They all had parents who had mixed parents, and they were placed into a prison camp by the order of General DeWitt. Look on that third row, if you can make out closely, these babies, all these babies in the third row being held by Japanese guardians, all pulled out from the orphanages and placed into the prison camp. There's no question. This is clear evidence of how much hate that the general had at that time. I remember these signs. These pictures are taken by Dorothea Lange. It gave instructions from General DeWitt on how to get ready. Store most of your belongings. You can take one hand carry and report to a place to board buses, which will take you to the trains. And the armed guards will escort you all the way. And this is law. If you don't do this, you're in violation of law. You are a criminal. And therefore, these signs went up in front of our houses and on lampposts and walls all over the area. Here's another photograph taken by Dorothea. It shows our parents lining up to register. What happened was the government required the parents to register the family. Now, why is registration important? In 1942, the government did not know how many Japanese lived in San Francisco or Los Angeles or elsewhere. So they required the parents to show up at this station and report how many kids do they have, how many relatives do they have, and that way the government learned about the population of how many. And you need to know that to figure out how many camps do I build, how many trains do I send to San Francisco, and how many guards do we need in order to make sure no one escapes. This photo by Dorothea is a good example of a photo the government hated. Notice the rifle, indicating the soldier is forcing people to take steps. And when the government saw that photograph, they said, Dorothea, you shouldn't have done that. We told you, that's embarrassing. So the government impounded all 1,000 of her photographs, and they were placed into a vault at the University of California in Berkeley and held there for a long time until they started coming out and we started seeing the kind of photographs that Dorothea Lange took at that time. Here's another picture taken by Dorothea, the family, Mosita family, getting ready for the move. Now the kids are wearing these dog tags. I remember I had a dog tag. It had my name and it had my prisoner number on it, getting ready for the big move. We got on the buses that took us to the trains, and now we were really heavily guarded. There are soldiers are shoulder to shoulder with weapons, making sure we get on the train. So that all these Japanese families with their suitcases getting ready to board. Our train went for 3 days and nights to a northern place in Wyoming until we got there, and it was an unsightly, desolate place. I'll talk about it a little bit more. Not everybody agreed. Out of 120,000 people who were Japanese ancestry, 3 people objected. One of them was a fellow named Fred Korematsu. Fred decided not to go. He felt it was his constitutional right to stay. He was an American citizen. And besides, he had an American, a white girlfriend, an Italian girl, and they had plans to stay and get married, change his name, and literally be hidden for the duration of the war. But it turns out he was caught because he needed money. And so he went to get a new job, and the new employer caught him. And so he was found guilty in a court case. And I went to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, you are still guilty and you shall go to prison. So Fred was one of the three that objected. Here's a map of all the camps. On the left, you'll see these dots. These are temporary camps. These were really horse race tracks or fairgrounds that were converted to a temporary prison. And we were held at these for 3 months. And that's how long it took to build the permanent camps. And the permanent camps are in these triangles. There were 10 of them. One in Wyoming, where I went, one in Idaho, one in Utah, one in Colorado, 2 out here in Arkansas, 2 in southern Arizona, and 2 on the eastern desolate slopes of California. So those were the 10. Each held an average of about, maybe about 10,000 people. So where is Heart Mountain, Wyoming? If you've been to Wyoming, you've probably been to Yellowstone, which is in the upper left-hand corner of this map. But if you go east of Yellowstone, there's a small town of Cody, Wyoming, and it had about 2,000 people in those days. And if you go northeast of Cody, about 30 miles, you'll find another really small town called Powell, Wyoming. That was maybe about 1,000 people. Heart Mountain is the name of the mountain exactly halfway between Cody and Powell. In other words, 15 miles away from Cody. And that's where the government decided to build the prison camp in the one and only one in Wyoming. I was curious as to what did the people of Cody think when they heard we were coming. So I looked at the headlines of the newspaper in Cody, and I found this headline: 10,000 Japs to be interned here. Here implying downtown Cody, which is not true. That's a frightening statement, because the people read it and said, "Oh my God, they're coming here to Cody," and so the hysteria started developing in Cody. That this massive number of the quote enemy is coming to Cody, Wyoming. Well, there's another fellow who really remembers what happened, and his name is Alan Simpson, former senator, Republican senator from Wyoming. And Alan, he knows because he was a teenager during World War II, and the Simpson family were raised in the town of Cody. And in this video, I'm going to show you he describes what the people of Cody really thought when they heard that we were coming. So let's play it and see if it works.
So then we were told there were 11,000 people there. Well, there are only 2 cities larger than that in Wyoming. That was Cheyenne and Casper. Powell was about 2,500, Cody probably 3,500, and so people thought, now if those people escape, we'll all be killed. Well, there were 11,000 of them there, and they're going to break out, and they'll come to town, and we'll be dead.
Isn't that amazing? The people of Cody thought, we're going to escape out of camp. 10,000 of us are going to go into Cody with our bare hands and strangle them all to death. Madness. But that's what hysteria does. That's what this media, for putting out misleading information, does. And that's the result of the hatred and the hysteria that developed. Here's the plan for the Heart Mountain camp. It's a big facility, 30 blocks. Each block had 24 barracks, each barrack containing 25 people. There were plans to build a high school and 2 elementary schools because they had no idea how long this will last. And when we got there, the high school had started to be built, but the 2 elementary schools were not built. And the reason being the local people complained. Why are you building new schools for prisoners when we who are not imprisoned don't get new schools? So the government stopped, other than finishing the high school. And so we had to go to elementary schools, which was really barracks turned into a school, which meant that the people who used to live in those barracks had to move away and make conditions even more crowded at that time. So the government hired a lot of people, workers, mostly carpenters, to come to Wyoming and build these barracks. Here's a finished product. The picture shows the Heart Mountain in the background. And these are the rows and rows of barracks, tar paper covered barracks. And this is the perimeter fence. This is the barbed wire fence. And there were 9 guard towers surrounding the entire camp. Here's one here in the foreground. You can see one here in the background on top of the hill. And there were 9 surrounding the entire facility. So when we came, there was a mass of people and all Japanese looking, except a few. I can talk about that a little later on. But that was the situation there when we arrived. Here are more details of the security system. The soldier on the left with his weapon pointing in toward the barracks. In the middle of details of the guard tower with the floodlights pointing inward toward the people. But most important, on the right side, you see these signs in English and Japanese, making it clear, stop, don't go beyond this point, because if you do, you can get shot and possibly killed. So that defines a prison. There's no question about it. We were now a prisoner of the US federal government inside this camp. Here's the details of the barrack, 6 rooms, they're all the same. Each room a little bit different inside. The end ones were for small families, like couples with a child. The next to the end ones are the largest, held up to 7 people. And the middle ones for medium size, which is our family. So that's my parents and my brother and myself. So that's 4 of us. So 4 of us living in a room 20 feet by 20 feet with no utilities and no insulation, and 4 cots with a little coal burning stove in the corner. And that was our home for 3 years during that time. Here's a picture taken in front of the barrack of our family. That's me in a white shirt. I was about maybe 11 years old here. I went in at 9, I came out at 12. So this is my 2nd year in the camp. And that's my brother in the sweater. My mother on the left and her sisters. This is my 3 aunts and an uncle standing in front of the barrack that I lived in. The toilets were an embarrassment. 10 toilets, seats, serving 300 people and no partitions. I'll tell you, that was not easy. We had some food at the start, and if you can look closely, there was bread on the plate. There's potatoes on this plate. On these saucers, there were pickled veggies. Inside the pitcher, there was powdered milk. And once in a while, for protein, we would get a dish called mutton, which is old sheep from Australia. Also, we sometimes would get liver. The problem is the Japanese people in 1942 didn't eat this kind of food. We love rice. We love fresh veggies. We like rice, fish, veggies. We like whole milk, and we like a little poultry and some eggs. So what we decided to do was convince the government, let us grow our own food. And that's exactly what we did. The property outside the camp is shown in this picture. Again, here's Heart Mountain, and here's these dark shadows are the barracks. And outside the camp, there was all desolate property all the way out to the Shoshone River, which is out here on the left. So all that was converted into a farmland. So we made farms out of this country. Uh-oh, my computer just crashed. I told myself I shouldn't use my mouse. All right, this will take just a moment, please be patient. And I'll have to, I know the mistake I made, which is using my mouse as a cursor, which I should not do, but I'll try to remember. Thank you. So anyway, so we built these farms and we got the kind of food that we wanted. It took about a year of hard work. The winters were awful. The winters in northern Wyoming on that first winter got down to minus 28 degrees, and we weren't used to that at all in California. We had a hospital. Well, all it was more barracks with a corridor. And our family had some real problems medically in the camp. For example, my father, he had a case of glaucoma of his eyes, and he was being taken care of in San Francisco where there was a specialist. But once he got to the Heart Mountain prison camp, no one knew how to take care of his eyes. And so he went blind in camp, never saw again once he entered the Heart Mountain facility. My grandfather had the worst case of all, and that is he died in camp. And it was not an unusual, it was an unusual passing because he suffered so much in a short time. And I learned later on what he had was a colon cancer. And I looked at his medical records a few years ago, and I found out that the so-called professional medical care was not very professional. They were made up of other prisoners who had some training in the medical field, but no one who knew how to take care of cancer. And literally, they were starving him to death. They wouldn't give him the proper nutrition. And I watched him going to skin and bones. He looked like a Holocaust survivor in a matter of a few months, and then he died. Very, very sad for our entire family. Toward the end of our stay, the government allowed a few of us to go into town to do some essential shopping. And I remember walking up and down this main street of Cody, Wyoming, and telling my father what's inside each store, describing to him. And all of a sudden, I saw about every third store, I saw this sign, "No Japs." They didn't want us there. It was an awful feeling. I learned that was my first exposure to real hatred, race hatred, by looking at these signs of shop owners not wanting us to shop in their own facility. At the very end, there was a hero attorney, a white attorney called James Purcell. And what happened was he knew the conditions in these camps, and he wanted to get these people out of those camps. And what he did was he found a lady by the name of Mitsue Endo, shown on the right, and he filed a lawsuit against the government saying you shouldn't do that. You cannot keep loyal US citizens in a prison for such a long time because that's unconstitutional. And it went to the Supreme Court. And in 1944, before the war ended, December 18th, Supreme Court decided 9-0, unanimous, all these people must be let go, must be allowed to return home because their most important civil right was denied. Most important case, thanks to this one attorney, James Purcell. So we all got on the trains, get ready to go back home. And the government decided to get rid of the camp. They took all 450 barracks and they sold them and made farmland out of where the camp used to be. So we're now in the process of trying to find these barracks and bring them back and try to recreate the prison that we used to have. When we got home, life became very difficult. because the racial hatred built up even stronger while we were gone. And here's a photograph of typical conditions when we got back home to California. The local people telling us, don't stop here, keep moving. It was an awful, awful sight. I remember going to the storage facility where we had to store a lot of our furnishings, our valuables, and this is what it looked like. They were ransacked, stolen items, some things were broken into. And so we lost a lot of valuables in this particular storage facility. But there's another kind of a problem that a good friend of mine, Toshi Ito, can talk about. Toshi is about my age, and she was in the same camp, Heart Mountain. And what happened is her father faced discrimination when he got back home after the war to San Jose, California, looking for a job. He was an insurance salesman, and he couldn't find it because of racial hatred. And I'll let Toshi explain in her video what really happened.
Not being able to provide for his family left him desperate.
And so he committed suicide. He finally figured out that if he committed suicide, my mother and I would be taken care of because she would get the premiums, the money from the insurance.
It happened when Toshi was a newlywed on her honeymoon. She received a call that her father was sick and she needed to come home. She remembers stepping off that train and being told what really happened.
I just started to cry, and I went to my mother and I hugged her and I said, I'm so sorry, And then when I got home, I went to his bed, and on the side he slept, and I just lay there and I cried, and I could smell his hair tonic that he wore, and I never cried so much in my life.
Very sad. I know Toshi, or I used to know her because she passed away last year. Very courageous of her to do that. And I know of other families who had similar problems, and they've asked me not to talk about it. They're kind of embarrassed about it, but not Toshi. She wanted the world to know, and that's why she made that film. But thanks to Toshi, and that can be a memory for many, many people. Let's see, here we go. So you'd think at this point, everything is all over, forget it. But the answer is no, we're not going to forget it. We wanted an apology from the government. We wanted some compensation for the damages, the losses that we had. So we went on a redress movement, redress being trying to correct something that was an error that had happened. And it took 50 years, a long time, for the government to try to do something about this. Part of that process involved an exhibit at Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian Museum. And there was an exhibit featuring at the outside the Dorothea Lange poster girl. And on the inside, there were photographs of Japanese American soldiers who fought for this country. They fought in Europe. And at the same exhibit are families of these soldiers who were inside a prison created by the same government. Like this photograph here. This is a Masuda family from Southern California, and they're neighbors of mine. And here's Sergeant Masuda in uniform, who came to say goodbye to the extended family. All of these people were inside the prison at that same time. And after the photograph was taken, Sergeant Masuda was shipped off to Europe and he died fighting for this country. So that photograph was sent to the White House, eventually got to no less than President Ronald Reagan. And Reagan finally decided now's the time. So he signed a bill which made it clear in writing an apology should be given to the people who were inside these prison camps. I received a letter from the first George Bush in 1990, which said that a sincere apology is given to me. And along with it came a small check that helped pay for the damages. Oh, what happened here? Here we go. Sorry about that. Heart Mountain today, still there, beautiful mountain, lovely place. But we want to do something different, something that is important that people will remember. So we built we started restoring the camp by bringing back the original barracks and try to recreate the prison camp as it was. And then we built a school. Here's the outside of it. It looks like the barracks, but the inside is a series of schoolrooms and help teach people what happened. We bring in a lot of people. These are the types of exhibits inside a self-guided tour to learn what really happened. Here's a bunch of young people who came in from a high school, and we do this all year round. I bus them in for a day trip, and the young people then learn really in more detail than I can talk about in this 1 hour what really happened. At the time we opened that school, I went downtown Cody. I went and visited Cody, and I looked up and down the street and looked in the shop windows just like I did in 1942. And guess what I saw in the windows? Every window in the store, in the town, every window had this sign: "Welcome, Japanese Americans." My goodness, the people of Cody have changed. My goodness, it's a welcome sign to see the happy greeting. I'm going to close out with a couple of snapshots of my buddies. You remember Willie? I talked about Willie a bit. Well, most of us went to college, became professionals, engineers, doctors, lawyers. Willie was different. He wanted to be the world's best cartoon artist. And that's okay if you're the best. Well, he went to a good art school and he was hired by Walt Disney. And he did okay with Walt Disney Organization. Now, I want you to look at a film that's coming up right now. I'll remember that. Well, Willie is the artist who made the Lady and the Tramp. So he got an equivalent of an Academy Award for that performance. That was really good. Remember the Toshi Ito, the sad story of Toshi Ito? Well, she got married, had a family, and that young boy down there, you might be interested in what he turned out to be, no less than Judge Lance Ito of the O.J. Simpson trial. And I know Lance very well. He's a real nice guy outside the courtroom. And I see him about once a month. And really a very, very, very fine fellow. I went to Berkeley, University of California, undergraduate and graduate school at UCLA. I was hired by the Boeing company to become a rocket scientist. I helped to develop these rockets that put up satellites that goes into space, and enjoyed every minute. But when I finished my career at Boeing, I retired. I wanted to do something different. And I got a call asking me if I can speak about my experience at the camps. And so I started all kinds of audiences. Here's a young lady, one person who wanted to hear my story. That was in Washington, D.C. when I was there. And I gave her that story. And then on the other hand, I've had a large audience. Here's a group of 1,500 students and parents and teachers at the high school in New Mexico. And they've asked me to come and speak. And that was a wonderful time that I had with them. Oh, what happened to the poster girl, the iconic image created by Dorothea Lange? Well, she grew up. Here's a more recent photograph of her. The eyes look the same. The nose is still the same. And she changed her name twice. Her first name used to be Hideno, and she changed it to Helene. Her last name used to be Nakamoto, which is a typical Japanese name. And she changed it to Mihara. We've been married for 62 years. And no, she doesn't remember Dorothea Lange taking her photograph until a relative saw her picture in the exhibit. Oh, that's a more recent photograph of us at an Apple store. And by the way, we had 2 girls and 2 grandkids, and everybody's grown up. They're all graduated from college. So I want to close with a thought. Why did these prison camps exist? Well, I told you why. There were 3 reasons. One was prejudice against the Japanese and not Germans and Italians. The second is hysteria, those media, the awful cartoons, and the media spreading word that we were dangerous. But most important, some of the leaders in 1942 failed to honor our constitutional rights and allowed that Executive Order 9066 to go through. So those are the lessons that we learned. And to this day, I keep looking for evidence that maybe these are happening again today. But think about it. Remember, I mentioned at one time, instead of Japanese families, it was almost German. It was almost Italian families. It could be your families. Today, it could be Middle Easterner. It could be Muslim Americans. And it certainly is, to some people, for immigrants, Latinos who are imprisoned. This could be your son looking at a guard wondering, where is he taking me? This could be your daughter inside the prison camp after 3 years, asking, when am I going to get out of here? And this could be your son trying to climb out of this prison, not knowing there's a guard with a weapon pointing straight at him. So I simply say, never again to anyone at all. Never again. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Let's see, I have exactly, about 55 minutes into the program. What do you think, Sarah and Corey? Shall we just keep on going, or shall we take a short break? I'm pretty good. Thumbs up if you want me to continue, or just wait. Either thumbs up to continue. Oh, okay, continue. Okay, only about 10 more minutes. Let me take a quick drink and then I'll be going. All right. Okay, short break. That was real short. Okay, I want to briefly talk about the detention of immigrant families. It's a sad, sad story. This is a map of all the prisons that hold immigrants today. When I saw this map, I was shocked. I had no idea. And I said, I want to go see what's going on. So I visited several of the prisons. There were 3 in California, Southern California, I went to, 1 in Arizona, 2 in Texas, including one of them for mothers with children, 1 in Pennsylvania for mothers with children, and 1 prison in Florida, south of Miami, for only children. In many cases, I was able to go in and interview some of the immigrants. In other cases, I talked to the attorneys who are trying to help these people to get asylum. In other words, get permission to stay in this country. In a few cases, I talked to the immigrants themselves to find out what's going on. And this is the picture that I got. These families, when they come across the border, they're faced with separation. And by the way, they didn't, not one of these people crossed by swimming a river or jumping across a fence, a wall. They went straight to a border station and asked to be asked for asylum, which is permission to stay in the country, which is all very legal. And so what the government does is segregate them into groups. Single mothers, single fathers, mothers with children, and in some cases, children alone. And they're placed initially into these cages where they're held until they determine what to do with them. And the families, and especially the children, are sleeping on these concrete floors while they have to wait. I went to this one facility, detention center in Texas, and I was not allowed to go inside, but I interviewed the lawyers. I looked at the outside from the security system. This was a regular prison. I had some photographs from inside taken by the government, and here's what it looks like. The children are under constant guard, secure when they travel to go to school or to mess halls, never out of sight of the escort, the guard staying with them. Inside the living quarters, it's very compact. This one was obviously designed for 6 people. And I was told by the attorneys that there have been times when up to 18 people were held. And then I started hearing about more stories about the lack of medical care that's adequate. I've talked to some immigrants who were injured and became infected, and they were not given antibiotics. I've read a report where many of the children, over 1,000 children, complained of sexual harassment. I mean, this is, it's really inhumane. And there has to be a better solution. I'm still continuing my studies and trying to learn more, but it's obvious so far, this country needs to solve this problem in a correct way that respects human rights as well as other rights that these people deserve. So that ends my, this is the last picture. This is more kids at the facility in Florida for children only. The same system of high security and under guard at all times. So, my conclusion so far, it's really an inhumane situation of detainees, and therefore we need a much better solution than building more prisons and building more walls. So that ends my comments on the immigrant story. Let's see, Corey or Sarah, will you then, can you pick off some questions? Do you have any questions so far?
Hi, Sam. We do have some questions, and a couple of them you've answered a little bit, but I'll read them to you anyway in case you have anything else you'd like to say. The first question was about the Heart Mountain camp, and the person who asked it was just wondering what all is still there today. I know you talked a little bit about the education center that's there. Is there anything else still there from the original camp?
What remains, other than the few barracks we're trying to bring in, part of the hospital is there. For some reason, they left some of the wards, and you can see that. There's an iconic chimney where there was a boiler that boiled the water, hot water for the hospital patient. There is a root cellar where we stored winter vegetables or summer vegetables for the winter because it's a long, hard winter. and we're in the process of restoring that. There's some cement work for the high school that remains. But other than that, no, there is no other remains of the camp itself. So we're simply trying to rebuild as much as we can of what it used to look like at those days. Yeah.
Okay. Our next question says, people seem to be complicit about going to the camp. Were there any escapees, or did anybody ever try to escape?
Good question. The answer is no one escaped. No one tried to escape from Heart Mountain except a few of us. I have to admit it, I was not a law-abiding prisoner. A bunch of friends of mine and I decided to escape. And we would crawl out from the barbed wire fences when the guards were not looking, and go down to the river for the day, but always coming back. So I guess technically we didn't escape, we always came back. And by the way, it's a long way from the Heart Mountain camp to the closest major transportation hub, which is Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's about 300 miles. So there was no question that it didn't make sense for us to try to escape. But anyway, no, we just stayed put and decided to wait for the government to take us back home after it was all over. Let's see, there was another part of that question? I forgot what that was.
No, I think that was all of that question.
Okay, all right.
This next question is interesting. It says, Sam's map showing all of the camp locations showed Fort McCoy in what would be Wisconsin. And they're wondering if there's anything that you could tell us about that location, or if you know anything about that camp.
I can only say that a lot of those other camps were run by the Department of Justice. In other words, the FBI. And what the government did was they identified the most dangerous Japanese among all the Japanese, 120,000 people. The most dangerous, you wouldn't believe this, are school teachers who teach Japanese language. They're dangerous because they might be teaching, you know, the idealism of the Japanese emperor. Business owners are dangerous because they know how to organize an activity, and that might be dangerous. And ministers are dangerous because they could preach to the congregation about the bad things against this country. So those three types of people, men only, women were not considered dangerous. Men only were required, identified and required to go. And I'm fairly certain that one prison site in Wisconsin was typical of those. It was an existing Army prison, and they held a few of the men only who were considered dangerous.
Okay. Someone else has entered the question. What sorts of rules were the prisoners asked to follow at the camps?
Oh, interesting question. We had really very few rules other than don't try to escape. One of them is a strange rule. Do not teach the Japanese language in camp. But that's what they said. And so the high school, we had night school for adults, and we taught English. But we were not allowed to teach Japanese language. But that's, those are some of the few. Oh, we had some local rules about, behavior and not being, doing bad things in the camp. But no, other than that, no, there was no special rules as far as we were told. No. And we had access to the media. We had newspapers, we had radios. We knew what was going on during the war. And so there was no question about our ability to get information during that time.
Okay, we have another question. Someone says they didn't realize that Dr. Seuss had penned such ugly cartoons, and they want to know how your family was able to find work in such an awful atmosphere when you went home.
Well, that was a significant problem. Many people, like the film showed with Toshi Ito, couldn't find jobs because of the racial hatred. Housing was difficult to come by if you lost your home, it was a very, very difficult situation. But my parents and a lot of parents did the only thing they could do, and that is to, find employment to at least get some source of income so we could continue to live. And also, our parents really motivated the younger people to get a good education. And that was the only way that we can survive in society, to be able to have the upward mobility that we all wanted, and that is to get a good education. And so that's what we focused on. I was very busy getting ready for college after camp, so it was a challenging time for everybody in our family.
Okay. Someone else is asking if if any of the camps are still intact today.
Heart Mountain is one of the better preserved camps. The one in California called Manzanar, where the picture was taken with the children, the orphan kids, that is being fairly well restored. Anyone who goes into California, goes for a visit, it's, well, you can Google the World War II prison camps, and you'll get one of the two. It's called Manzanar, north of Los Angeles, about 3 hours of driving. Those are probably the two best examples, Heart Mountain and Manzanar. The others are in the process of trying to restore, but they aren't as far advanced as we have been here at Heart Mountain or at Manzanar.
Okay. Someone else is asking, what did children do in the camps other than go to school?
Oh, good question. A similar question is, did I have fun? I talked about sad parts of my life. And the answer is, oh, well, we tried to have fun in the limited time we had other than going to school. I can remember we would go looking for arrowheads. This was native Indian territory before, and it was easy to find arrowheads, and we would make up an arrowhead collection from what we could find. We would of all crazy things, we would capture local wildlife and try to raise them as pets. I remember one of my buddies captured a bird, a magpie, and turned it into a children's book, and it became a good seller. And other things. Some of us caught scorpions and rattlesnakes. Oh yeah, we did some crazy things, and our parents would frown on that kind of stuff, but we did that. We used to cut off the rattle tails of the rattlesnakes and have a contest. How many rattles can you pick up in a month, and so forth. So we had those kinds of pastimes. And like I mentioned, we would escape for the day from the camp. But the parents recognized socially there was a real problem, because young people had a lot of time on their hands and what to do about it. So they created activities for the young people to do. For example, the Boy Scout and Girl Scout movement was huge at the camp. We had 12 troops of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts in the camp. I was a Cub Scout during those days. And there were other social events, even for the adults. And people were pretty much they tried to keep busy as much as possible. Yeah. Good question.
Someone else asked, What do you suggest that we do with the modern day prison camps?
Well, that is really an interesting question. And I've given a lot of thought to it because I speak every once in a while to history teachers when I raise the question, what do we do about this problem we have? One view that I have, to be blunt, I don't think this country has thought about a better solution. Let me give you an example. Instead of pouring money into building expensive miles and miles of walls, instead of building more prisons for immigrants, how about putting more effort into solving the problem in the country that they're from? If we can make life in Central America more desirable for the locals to stay, we wouldn't have the immigration problem we have today. But I'm not sure that that's given much thought. But it sure would be cheaper than building more prisons and building more walls. And so I simply point out that, I think, collectively, the whole world needs to figure out a better solution because this is a common problem among not only the US, but a lot of countries. And hopefully it'll be motivation for people to think about a better solution to the problem. Good question.
Someone asks, what are your thoughts on the value of preserving the prison camps, especially in relation to today's tearing down of monuments and statues, such as Confederate statues, etc.?
Well, and that is a good question. My answer to that is, I think you have to have memories. You have to have evidence of what really happened. Because if they're gone, it's easy for people to say, oh, they didn't exist. Let me cite an example. I went to Germany some time ago, and I went to the prison camps for the Jews, the Holocaust camps. If they weren't preserved, I would have raised some doubt as to, is this story really true? But when I walked into, especially this Dachau prison, and you see gas chambers and you see mass equipment for cremation and the concentrated barracks that they had, you'll never forget it. You can't dream up such a scenario. And that's the point of it. If you want people to remember vividly, that is certainly an important way. And we believe in that at the case of Heart Mountain and all of the 10 camps, that they should be a living testimonial to a decision that should not have been made. And it should never happen again to anyone else. And they're very, very important to our message.
Okay. Someone else is asking about the allegiance questionnaire. It says, can you talk about the allegiance questionnaire that was issued? And did you know anyone who did not consider checking yes and yes? And what was the conversation around that?
Good question. Let me briefly tell people who don't know what that's all about. While we were in the camp, the government decided to give us all an examination. I got to be careful. Not everybody. Every adult, everyone of age 17 or older, you got a quiz, an examination on a piece of paper. And there were two questions on there. One question was, would you be willing to serve in the U.S. military if you were asked? If you answer yes, that means you're loyal. Yeah. If they want me to serve, I'll serve. If you answer no, it means you're not loyal to this country. The second question is, are you loyal to this country, to U.S. country? And do you give up your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? And that question, you can't answer that, because if you answer either way, that means at one time you used to have allegiance. Before the war, you used to have allegiance. And none of the Japanese in this country who immigrated had allegiance to the Emperor of Japan. You have to pass an exam when you immigrated. Even today, you get a question. Do you give up the loyalty to the former country? Every immigrant has that question. So that question was part of the two questions. If you answered yes, that means you're okay. If you answered no, that means you're not okay, and you failed. So they labeled these people who answered no to either question a no, the no being for the two questions. They were sent to a separate camp. They call it a segregation camp in northern California. It held up to 18,000 people. The people who were labeled as who failed the test, or who scored a no, or if you refused to answer the question, you were still declared a no. And they were all sent to this one prison at a place called Tule Lake in Northern California. So unfortunately, that's what happened. And yes, to answer the question, do I know anybody? I have a couple of friends who wound up at that segregation prison because their parents answered no. So the children had to go with them. And so unfortunate, but yes, that is true. That is accurate.
Okay, I have two more questions, if that's okay, Sam.
Sure, I'm okay.
Okay, so someone is wondering, did most of the people who were finally released remain American citizens, or were there some who wanted to go back to Japan and be citizens there?
Interesting question. Of the people who answered no, or people who outright wanted to leave the U.S., we were given the option to request being repatriated back to Japan. I would roughly guess maybe 10% of the people were in that category. They preferred to go back to Japan. The plan was to build up this reserve of many Japanese who want to be returned back to Japan in trade for American citizens who were caught in Japan to come back home to the U.S. So that was a master plan. The program started, but never was finished. I know some people who went to Japan, and after they went to Japan, some changed their mind and wanted to come back to the U.S. Some decided to stay. So there's different kinds of people, but the answer to the question is yes, there were some of the people who wanted to return back to Japan during that time. But like I say, about 90% of the people did not want to go back, no.
Okay, and the last question that I have here is, someone is wondering, what is your most prominent memory of being in the camps, whether it's good or bad?
Oh, I've rehearsed that question because I've asked that before. I was asked that before. Real simple. I'll first talk about the worst experience. The going to a prison camp, seeing the guards, the fences, living with your parents in a single room for 3 years. They weren't the worst. The food was bad. The toilets were difficult. My father going blind, my grandfather dying. They were bad, but that still wasn't the worst. The worst experience I had was going to downtown Cody and seeing those hatred signs. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. And, to this day, you know, whenever possible, I'll point out that it hurts when people express hatred, whether it's religious or racial or whatever, you know, then that's got to stop, because it is very, very hurtful on a very personal level. Now, what's the best thing ever happened to me? Well, it wasn't capturing rattlesnakes. It wasn't eating better food. It was the day when I came back to look at the camp, and I went to downtown Cody. I saw these wonderful signs when I finally realized everybody in Cody today are very, very friendly, and they're very open, and I detected no hostility of the kind that we saw during World War II, and that made me really feel good. So that's my story on the worst and the best.
Okay. Well, that was all of the questions that came in. And
Well, hour and 30 minutes, they're not bad.
I know, right?
Time flies. Okay.
Oh, so I just want to thank you, Sam, for joining us
pleasure.
tonight. We really appreciate it. And it
My
adds
pleasure.
such a
you.
nice element to our Waukesha Reads book this year. So thank you so
Okay.
much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, and Sarah. I appreciate it very much. I need to call you Sarah in a moment. I'll do that in a few minutes. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sam. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.